In a small rural town, where life moves as slowly as the clouds, destiny was about to strike with the force of nature itself. When the ground started shaking, most people ran for safety, but not Jake Miller. While others fled, he ran toward the sound of children crying beneath the rubble of what was once the town's oldest building. With nothing but his bare hands and an unshakable determination, he dug through the night, refusing to let two innocent lives become another tragedy's footnote. He saved them just moments before another aftershock would have sealed their fate, then disappeared into the dawn like a guardian angel. But what happens when a billionaire mother's private jet lands the next morning, carrying not just gratitude, but perhaps the key to healing 3 broken hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake Miller's alarm hadn't gone off at 5:30 in the morning for the past 15 years. It didn't need to. His body knew the rhythm of dawn like an old song, rising with the first hint of light that crept through his bedroom window. The same window he'd been meaning to fix since Sarah passed. Funny how a man who spent his days repairing other people's homes could leave his own wearing thin around the edges. The morning routine never varied. Coffee first, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in, made in the same chipped mug Sarah had given him on their first anniversary. Then a quick shower in water that never quite got hot enough, thanks to a water heater he kept promising himself he'd replace next month. His weathered hands moved automatically through the motions of his morning, finding his worn work clothes in the dark to avoid switching on lights in empty rooms. The leather wallet sat on his dresser where it always did, its edges softened by years of use. Jake picked it up, his calloused thumb automatically finding the small tear in its surface where he kept the photograph. Sarah's smile hadn't faded, though the picture had. She was standing in front of their first house, paint splattered across her overalls, that fierce determination in her eyes that had made him fall in love with her. "Another day, sweetheart," he whispered, tucking the wallet into his back pocket. His truck's engine coughed to life in the pre-dawn chill, the sound echoing off the empty driveways of his neighbors' homes. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, but at this hour, Jake had the streets to himself, just the way he liked it. The local radio station crackled with weather reports and farming updates as he drove toward his first job. Of the day, Mrs. Henderson's Victorian needed new shutters again. The old woman insisted on maintaining the original wood ones from 1892, even though Jake had gently suggested modern materials might last longer. But he understood. Some things were worth preserving, even if it meant a little extra work. He'd been maintaining her house for so long now that she'd stopped asking for estimates, just leaving him notes with fresh-baked cookies. "Jake Miller, you're a godsend," she'd say every time, pressing a little extra into his hand despite his protests. "They don't make them like you anymore." The morning wore on into afternoon, each job blending into the next. A leaky faucet at the Petersons', new weather stripping for the Dawsons' front door, a stubborn garbage disposal at the community center that had been giving the staff fits. Simple fixes for simple problems, the kind of work that let his hands stay busy while his mind wandered down well-worn paths of memory. The other contractors in town had slowly modernized, taking on bigger jobs, hiring crews, expanding their businesses. But Jake kept it simple, one man, one truck, one job at a time. He'd learned long ago that bigger wasn't always better. Sarah had taught him that in her way. "It's not about how much you do," she'd say. "It's about doing it right." Lunch was always the same. A turkey sandwich and an apple, eaten in his truck while reviewing the day's remaining jobs. The radio kept him company, playing the same songs it had been playing for the last 20 years. He knew every word, but never sang along anymore. The afternoon sun found him replacing rotted boards on old Mr. Wilson's porch. The elderly veteran sat in his rocking chair, telling the same war stories Jake had heard 100 times before, but he listened anyway, nodding in all the right places. Sometimes Jake thought, The most important part of his job wasn't the repairs he made to people's homes, but the time he spent listening to their stories. As the day wound down, Jake made his final stop at the hardware store. Tom, behind the counter, already had his usual order ready. A few spare parts, some sandpaper, a couple of fresh paintbrushes. "Busy day?" Tom asked. Though he already knew the answer, Jake's days were always busy, filled with the small repairs that kept the town's home standing and its people comfortable. "Same as always," Jake replied, offering the same small smile he gave everyone. It was easier that way, keeping things simple, predictable. The weight of his wallet, with Sarah's picture inside, pressed against him as he paid his bill. The drive home took him past the old cemetery. He didn't stop today. He never did on work days, but his eyes found the familiar headstone automatically. "Almost done, sweetheart," he murmured, as if Sarah could hear him through the truck's window. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway, just as he'd left it that morning, just as it had been every evening for the past 5 years. Jake stood for a moment in the growing dusk, looking at the peeling paint on the porch rails, the loose shingle on the corner of the roof, the garden that had long since gone wild. All things he could fix, if only he could find the will to start. Inside, he moved through his evening routine with the same quiet efficiency as his mornings. Dinner was simple, a microwaved meal eaten at the kitchen counter. The TV stayed off. The silence was company enough. Tomorrow would be another day of fixing other people's homes, of keeping their worlds together while his own stayed frozen in time, preserved like Sarah's photograph in his wallet. As night settled over Millbrook, Jake Miller lay in his bed, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of his house. Outside, his window, the stars wheeled overhead, unchanged and constant. He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the ground itself would shift beneath his feet, and all his careful routines would crumble like the foundations of his carefully constructed solitude. But for now he slept, dreaming of Sarah's smile and the smell of fresh paint. The community center hummed with the quiet energy of Tuesday night's Young Astronomers program. In the back corner of the activity room, 7-year-old Sophia Chase sat cross-legged on a worn blue cushion, her dark curls falling forward as she pored over the complete guide to the night sky. Her twin brother Samuel lay on his stomach beside her, feet swaying in the air as he traced constellation patterns with his finger. "Look, Sophie," Samuel whispered, though his excited whisper carried across the room. "Cassiopeia looks just like Mommy's signature." His finger traced the familiar W shape on the page. Sophia leaned over, her small face serious as she considered his observation. "It does," she agreed, "but Mommy's is fancier." She pulled out her own notebook, covered in carefully drawn stars and planets, and showed him their mother's last birthday card signature she'd traced and kept. The twins shared a quiet moment, comparing the Cosmic Queen's crown to their mother's flowing script. Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the program, watched the twins with a mixture of pride and concern. They were her brightest students, always eager to learn, always first to arrive and last to leave. But she couldn't help noticing how they never mentioned when their mother would attend the monthly parent presentation nights, or how they always had their au pair drop them off and pick them up. "Sophia, Samuel," she called softly, "would you like to help set up the telescope for tonight?" Both children's faces lit up like twin supernovas. They carefully marked their places in the astronomy book, a library copy that had seen better days, and hurried over to help. Their matching sweaters, obviously expensive but slightly rumpled from a day of wear, caught the fluorescent light as they moved. "Mrs. Abernathy," Sophia began, her voice carrying that peculiar formality some children develop when they spend too much time around adults. "Will we be able to see Jupiter's moons tonight?" "If the clouds clear," Mrs. Abernathy answered, helping Samuel adjust the telescope stand. The forecast looked promising. "Did you know," Samuel chimed in, not to be outdone by his sister, that Galileo discovered Jupiter's 4 biggest moons in 1610? He thought they were stars at first. His words tumbled out with enthusiasm, though he pronounced Galileo carefully, like he'd practiced it. Sophia nodded sagely, but he kept watching them and saw they moved around Jupiter. That's how he knew. They were moons. The twins shared another look, that silent communication that seemed magical to outsiders but was second nature to them. The other children began filtering in for the evening session, their parents chatting by the door. Sophia and Samuel's attention remained fixed on the telescope setup, but Mrs. Abernathy noticed how their eyes occasionally darted to the family scenes playing out behind them. "My dad says we might get a telescope for Christmas," Tommy Parker announced as he joined them, his father's hand resting proudly on his shoulder. "That's nice," Sophia replied politely, while Samuel became intensely focused on cleaning the telescope lens with his shirt sleeve until Mrs. Abernathy gently stopped him. The twins had their own telescope, of course, a professional-grade model that sat unused in their home's observation room. Their mother had ordered it after their first excited mention of the astronomy program, along with every astronomy book and educational toy the internet could provide. But it wasn't the same as having someone to share it with. As the evening progressed, the twins threw themselves into the lesson about lunar phases with their usual enthusiasm. They worked together seamlessly, Sophia's methodical approach complementing Samuel's creative leaps. When they demonstrated the moon's orbit around the Earth for the younger children, they moved in perfect synchronization, years of shared experience. Evident in every gesture, the astronomy book lay forgotten on their cushion, its well-worn pages open to a chapter about celestial navigation. "The stars will always guide you home," read the chapter's opening line. Words the twins had memorized, though neither could quite explain why they found them so comforting. As the session wound down and parents began collecting their children, Sophia and Samuel lingered over the astronomy book. Their au pair wouldn't arrive for another 15 minutes. She was always precisely on time, never early, never late. "Maybe next time," Samuel said softly to his sister, not needing to finish the thought. Sophia squeezed his hand. "She's very busy," she replied, sounding far older than her 7 years. "Running an empire, that's what Ms. Carson says." They carefully returned the astronomy book to the center's small library shelf, their fingers trailing over its worn spine with reluctant farewell. Neither twin noticed Jake Miller in the hallway, fixing that stubborn garbage disposal, his tools, spread out on the floor as he worked. They didn't know that tomorrow their paths would cross in a way that would change all their lives forever. For now, they simply waited. 2 bright stars in orbit around an absent sun, their shared love of the cosmos filling the space where a mother's presence should have been. The old wall clock in the community center's main hall ticked steadily toward closing time. Jake Miller wiped his hands on a shop rag, satisfied with the newly repaired garbage disposal. The sound of children's voices drifted down the hallway. As parents arrived for pickup, a routine end to another routine day. He reached for his phone to log the job's completion, 9:47 p.m. That's when he felt it. A subtle vibration through the soles of his work boots, like a distant freight train approaching. Except the railroad tracks were miles away. In the astronomy room, Sophia was the first to notice something wrong. The telescope they'd carefully positioned began to tremble, its metal legs chattering against the linoleum floor. "Samuel," she whispered, grabbing her brother's hand. The astronomy book slid off the shelf behind them. The tremor grew stronger. Coffee cups began dancing across the front desk. Car alarms activated in the parking lot, their discordant chorus piercing the evening quiet. Mrs. Abernathy's face went pale as she looked up at the ancient light fixtures swaying overhead. "Everyone under the tables!" she shouted, her teacher's instincts kicking in. "Now!" Parents lunged for their children. The room erupted in screams as the first major shockwave hit. The building groaned, decades-old joints protesting against forces they were never designed to withstand. Tommy Parker's father scooped him up and ran for the door, others following close behind. Jake's phone clattered to the floor, its screen cracking on impact. The video recording he'd started for his job log continued running, capturing the growing chaos. He braced himself in the doorway, years of construction experience telling him this was bad, very bad. Through the confusion, he heard Mrs. Abernathy's voice. "Sophia! Samuel, come here!" The twins had frozen in place, their faces mirror images of terror as books cascaded from shelves around them. The telescope crashed to the floor, its lens shattering. The ceiling began to rain dust and debris. Jake pushed, off from his doorway, moving against the flow of fleeing people. His boots crunched over broken glass and plaster as the building shuddered again, harder this time. "The children!" Mrs. Abernathy's voice cracked with panic. "Someone help the children!" Jake reached the astronomy room's door just as the power failed. Emergency lights kicked on, casting everything in a sickly green glow. He saw Mrs. Abernathy reaching for the twins who still hadn't moved. The elderly teacher stumbled as another violent shake rocked the building. "Get out!" Jake shouted. "I'll get them!" The next few seconds stretched like taffy. Jake lunged forward just as a support beam gave way with a sound like thunder. Mrs. Abernathy screamed. The twins finally broke their paralysis, running toward Jake's voice in the darkness. They were almost there. Almost. The floor buckled. Jake heard the horrible sound of concrete giving way somewhere above them. His body moved on instinct, diving forward as Sophia and Samuel reached for him. His fingers brushed their outstretched hands. The world exploded. When Jake opened his eyes, he was outside. How long had he been out? Seconds, minutes. His head throbbed and something warm trickled down his face. People were running, crying, pointing at the community center. Where the astronomy room had been, there was now only a gaping hole in the building's face. His cracked phone lay nearby, somehow still recording. The screen displayed the time. 9:52 p.m. 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes had passed since that first tremor. Sirens wailed in the distance. Emergency vehicles would be coming, but Jake knew they'd be overwhelmed. In a town this size, with a building this old, then he heard it, faint but unmistakable through the settling dust and chaos. "Help! Somebody help us!" Children's voices, calling from somewhere in the rubble. Two voices, crying in unison. Jake looked at his phone one last time before pocketing it, the cracked screen still faithfully recording. He turned toward the ruined building, mentally mapping its structure, calculating load-bearing points, identifying possible void spaces where two small children might have survived. Another aftershock rumbled through the ground. Time was running out. Without hesitation, Jake Miller walked back into the darkness, toward the sound of children crying for help. Behind him, the old wall clock, somehow still hanging, stopped forever at 9:47 p.m. The moment everything changed. The dust hadn't settled when Jake began his assessment of the collapse. 25 years of construction work had taught him how buildings failed, and more importantly, how they could still hold pockets of life within their ruins. His work gloves, already worn from a day's labor, felt inadequate against the jagged edges of broken concrete and twisted metal. "Sophia! Samuel!" His voice echoed through the debris field. A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, their phones casting eerie, blue light across the scene. Somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens wailed, but Jake knew help would be spread thin tonight. The whole town had felt that quake. "We're here!" The response was muffled but clear, two voices speaking as one. "Please help us!" Jake oriented himself toward the sound. The astronomy room had been on the second floor, but most of that level had pancaked down. He spotted a void space where a fallen beam had created a triangular shelter against a partially standing wall. The twins' voices seemed to be coming from beyond it. "Stay where you are," he called out. "Keep talking to me." His gloves caught on a piece of rebar as he cleared the first layer of debris. The threadbare leather tore, exposing his palm, but he barely noticed. A police cruiser arrived, its lights painting the scene in rotating red and blue. "Sir, you need to step back," an officer called out. "The structure's unstable." Jake didn't pause in his work. "There are children trapped inside." He gestured toward the void space. "I can hear them. We have rescue teams en route." "They don't have time." Jake cut him off, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. He could feel the building settling, hear the ominous creaks of stressed materials seeking their final resting place. The twins' frightened voices spurred him on. "We're studying Orion," Samuel's voice called out, trembling but brave. "His belt has 3 stars. Alnitak, Alnilam and Mintaka," Sophia added, and Jake could hear tears in her voice despite her attempt at bravery. Jake worked methodically, each movement calculated. "Tell me more about the stars," he encouraged them, wanting to keep them talking, keep them conscious. His torn gloves grew damp with blood as he cleared debris, but he couldn't stop to deal with cuts and scrapes. Not now. More emergency vehicles arrived. Firefighters began setting up floodlights, their harsh beams cutting through the dust-filled air. Jake heard fragments of radio chatter about other collapses around town, about overwhelmed emergency services, about aftershocks yet to come. "Sir," a firefighter approached, equipment ready. "We need to coordinate this rescue properly." A low rumble cut through the night. The ground trembled again. An aftershock. Small cascades of debris rained down from the unstable structure. The twins screamed. "The ceiling's moving," Sophia cried out. "Please hurry." Jake turned to the firefighter. "There's no time for coordination. Those children are running out of air." He pointed to where he'd been clearing debris. "This is the only way through that won't bring the rest down. I've been building and repairing structures in this town for 25 years. Trust me." Something in his voice must have convinced them. The firefighter nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "Keep those lights on the area. Have medical ready. But nobody else comes in." The extra weight could shift everything. Jake returned to his task, moving with renewed urgency. His fingers were slick with blood inside the ruined gloves, but he could hear the twins more clearly now. They had begun reciting constellation names, their shared knowledge becoming a lifeline of comfort. "Cassiopeia," Samuel's voice quavered. "Ursa." "Major," Sophia responded. "Andromeda," they said together. Jake's hand brushed something soft, a piece of fabric. He carefully shifted a chunk of drywall and found a child's backpack, decorated with planets and stars. The sight gave him renewed energy. "I'm getting closer," he called out. "Keep talking about the stars." "Perseus." Samuel's voice was weaker now. "Pegasus," Sophia whispered. The air grew thicker with dust. Jake's arms trembled with fatigue, but he couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Somewhere in his mind, he heard Sarah's voice. "Some things are worth any price, Jake." Another piece of concrete moved, revealing a small opening. Through it, he caught a glimpse of 2 pale faces in the beam of his flashlight, huddled together in a tiny pocket of safety created by fallen debris. "I see you," he said softly, his voice rough with dust and emotion. "I'm coming." The twins reached toward the light, their small hands clasped together. Jake's torn gloves were now more red than brown, but he barely felt the pain. The night wasn't over. The children weren't safe yet, but in that moment, seeing their faces in the flashlight's beam, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Behind him, the emergency crews prepared for a difficult extraction. Above him, the damaged building groaned with threatening promise. And somewhere in the distance, a private jet was already changing course, carrying a mother who had no idea her world had just shifted on its axis. 10:15 p.m. Jake's flashlight beam caught the shimmer of tears on the twins' faces. The opening he'd created was barely wide enough for his arm. The beam of light faltered, flickering ominously. He tapped the flashlight against his palm, but the beam only grew weaker. "My batteries are dying," he called to the rescue team. "Need another light." "Are you afraid of the dark?" Sophia's small voice drifted through the opening. Despite everything, she sounded more concerned about him than herself. "Not anymore," Jake answered. thinking of all the nights he'd sat alone in his darkened house. "But I bet you two know all about stars that light up the darkness, don't you?" "Polaris," Samuel said quickly. "The North Star, it never moves." "That's right." Jake worked as they talked, carefully shifting debris. "Just like you two need to stay still for me, okay?" Tight PM. The temperature had dropped significantly. Jake could see the twins' breath in the beam of his replacement flashlight. Sophia and Samuel huddled closer together, their matching sweaters covered in dust. "The stars look different in Switzerland," Sophia said suddenly, her voice small but clear. "That's where Mommy is. The Alps get in the way." Jake's hands stilled for a moment. "Your mom's in Switzerland?" "Business trip," Samuel explained, with the practiced tone of a child too used to such absences. "She was supposed to come home next week." "Well," Jake resumed his careful work, "we'll have quite a story to tell her when she gets here." 45 p.m. The rescue teams had set up powerful floodlights around the collapse zone, but they created confusing shadows that made Jake's work more challenging. His torn gloves were stiff with dried blood, and every movement sent pain shooting through his lacerated hands. "Let someone spell you for a while," a firefighter suggested. Jake shook his head. "The kids trust my voice now. We can't risk frightening them with someone new." Midnight. Another aftershock, smaller but still threatening. Jake heard Sophia whimper, and Samuel trying to comfort her with more constellation names. The opening was almost large enough now, almost. "You know what this reminds me of?" Jake kept his voice steady as he worked. "When I was your age, I used to build pillow forts. Had to be very careful about how I structured them." "Did they fall down?" Samuel asked. "Sometimes, but then I'd build them better the next time. That's how we learn." 12:30 a.m. Jake's flashlight began to flicker again. He switched it off to conserve what little battery remained. The twins made frightened sounds in the darkness. "It's okay," he assured them. "Remember Polaris? Even when we can't see it, it's still there, showing us the way home. Like Mommy," Sophia whispered to her brother, but Jake heard it. His heart clenched at the mixture of hope and doubt in her voice. 15 a.m. The opening was finally wide enough. Jake shone his failing flashlight through one last time, meeting two pairs of dust-streaked but trusting eyes. "Okay, stars," he said softly, using the nickname they'd earned through their celestial recitations. "Here's what we're going to do. Sophia, you're closest. I need you to reach for my hand. Samuel, don't let go of your sister. You're going to be each other's anchors, just like always." The light flickered one final time and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the distant floodlights. "I can't see." Sophia's voice trembled. "But I can feel you," Jake replied, reaching into the darkness. "Sometimes that's more important than seeing. Trust me." Small, cold fingers brushed against his lacerated palm. Jake bit back a gasp of pain and gently closed his hand around Sophia's. "Got you, Star," he said softly. "Samuel, hold tight to your sister. That's right. Now, easy does it." The next few minutes were a blur of careful movement, soft words of encouragement, and the twins' quiet whimpers. Jake guided them through the opening with infinite patience, knowing one wrong move could bring the remaining structure down around them. Finally, impossibly, he felt the weight of two small bodies pressed against him in the darkness. The twins clung to him like sea stars, their arms wrapped around his neck, their hearts beating butterfly fast against his chest. "Let's get you out of here," he whispered. As Jake carried them toward safety, the dead flashlight knocked against his hip, a reminder of how close they'd come to being lost in the darkness. Behind them, the partially collapsed building groaned one final time, as if surrendering to the night. But Jake Miller wasn't listening anymore. He was focused on the precious weight in his arms and the first rays of dawn that were beginning to paint the eastern sky with promise. The first rays of dawn painted the disaster scene in soft amber light as Jake emerged from the rubble with the twins. Their space-themed backpack, discovered earlier, dangled from his shoulder, a small piece of normalcy amid the chaos. Sophia and Samuel remained pressed against him, their small bodies trembling but alive. Emergency workers rushed forward with blankets and medical equipment, but the twins only tightened their grip on Jake's shirt. He could feel their resistance, their fear of being separated after hours of holding on to each other in the darkness. "It's okay, Stars," he murmured. "These people need to check you over. Make sure you're both shining bright." Sophia lifted her dust-covered face from his shoulder. "Will you stay? Please," Samuel added, his voice barely a whisper. Before Jake could answer, the ground began to rumble again. The aftershock hit with unexpected force, sending people stumbling. Behind them, the partially collapsed building groaned ominously. Jake didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, shielding the twins with his body as a cascade of debris crashed down, where they had been standing moments before. The air filled with dust and the sound of screaming. When it cleared, the opening Jake had spent hours creating had vanished, buried under tons of fresh rubble. If they had been 5 minutes slower— "My God," a paramedic breathed. 5 minutes later and— But it wasn't. Jake cut him off, conscious of the children's ears pressed against his chest. He could feel their hearts racing, their small bodies shaking with delayed shock. "Let's focus on what these stars need right now." The medical team worked quickly, checking vital signs while Jake sat on the back of an ambulance, a twin tucked against each side. They refused to let go of his shirt, and he found himself reluctant to break that connection. His torn hands throbbed, but he barely noticed the pain as paramedics cleaned and bandaged them. "You're very brave," a nurse said to the twins as she checked them over. "Just like shooting stars blazing through the night." Sophia managed a small smile. "Shooting stars aren't really stars," she corrected quietly. "They're meteors burning up in the atmosphere." "Space rocks," Samuel added, his voice growing stronger, "like the ones in our book." His voice trailed off as both twins suddenly remembered their beloved astronomy book, now buried in the rubble. Their faces fell in perfect synchronization. "Hey now," Jake said softly, recognizing their distress. "Books can be replaced. Stars like you two, one of a kind in the whole universe." The twins leaned closer to him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. The paramedics exchanged knowing looks, but said nothing as they continued their examination. Dawn had fully broken now, revealing the extent of the destruction. The community center's familiar silhouette was forever altered, its eastern wing a tumbled mass of concrete and steel. Jake saw Mrs. Abernathy being treated nearby, her face pale but relieved as she watched the twins. Emergency vehicles continued to arrive and depart, their sirens creating a chaotic symphony across the town. News vans were starting to appear, drawn by reports of the miraculous rescue. Mr. Miller, a police officer, approached, notepad in hand. "We'll need a statement later," Jake said firmly, feeling the twins tense at the official tone. "These stars need rest first." Sophia yawned as if on cue, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Samuel's eyes were already drooping, though he fought to keep them open. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind two very tired, very scared children who had just lived through the longest night of their young lives. "Where?" Samuel started to ask but couldn't finish. "Their aunt is on her way," Mrs. Abernathy called over. "Caroline Chase, she's their emergency contact." Jake nodded but made no move to leave. He sat there, a guardian angel in dusty work clothes, as the twins finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. Their space-themed backpack rested at his feet, its once bright planets now dulled with dust, a small survivor of its own, marking the night when the Earth shook, and a simple handyman became something more. He didn't know about the private jet, racing through the morning sky, carrying a mother whose world was about to change forever. He didn't know that his quiet life was about to be transformed. For now, he simply held these two precious stars, keeping them safe as the sun rose on a changed world. The Millbrook Morning Herald's front page practically wrote itself. "Mystery Hero Saves Twins," proclaimed the headline over a grainy photo taken by someone's cell phone. a dust-covered figure emerging from the rubble with two small shapes clutched against his chest. The story had already gone viral, spreading across social media faster than the aftershocks that still occasionally rippled through the town. Dawn revealed the full extent of the destruction. The community center's partial collapse was just one of several major structural failures throughout Millbrook. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, their exhaustion evident in their slow movements and coffee-stained paper cups littering the command post. Jake had finally surrendered the twins to their aunt's care around 3 a.m., but only after Caroline Chase arrived in person, her normally perfectly coiffed hair disheveled from a panicked drive from the city. The twins had woken briefly during the transfer, their small hands reaching for Jake even as exhaustion pulled them back under. "Thank you," Caroline had whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria's on her way. She's beside herself." Now, as morning light filtered through the dust-filled air, Jake sat in his truck, staring at his bandaged hands. He should go home, get some rest. But something kept him there, watching the rescue crews sift through the rubble, documenting the night's devastation. The local news van had arrived earlier, eager for interviews. Jake had slipped away before they could corner him, leaving the official statements to the emergency services personnel. He wasn't interested in being anyone's hero. The newspaper lay on his passenger seat, its headline seeming to mock his desire for anonymity. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Henderson worried about her Victorian's shutters after the quake. The normal rhythm of his life beckoned, offering the comfort of routine, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of small hands clutching his shirt, couldn't forget the trust in those twin pairs of eyes as he guided them through the darkness. The sound came first, a low, powerful hum that didn't belong among the usual morning noises of emergency vehicles and cleanup crews. Jake looked up through his dusty windshield to see a sleek private jet descending toward Millbrook's small regional airport. Its polished surface caught the morning sun like a falling star. Even from this distance, the Chase Industries logo was visible on the tail. Victoria Chase was coming home. Jake had heard stories about the twins' mother, of course. Everyone in town had. The local girl who'd transformed her father's struggling technology company into a global empire. The billionaire CEO who'd put Millbrook on the map, even if she rarely visited anymore. The woman who'd lost her husband in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving her to raise twins alone while running a Fortune 500 company. He watched the jet land, its arrival sending ripples through the emergency crews. Phones emerged from pockets, calls were made. The morning paper's headline seemed to vibrate with new energy. The mystery hero wouldn't remain anonymous for long. Jake started his truck, intending to leave before the circus began. But as he reached for the gear shift, his eyes caught on the newspaper again. The grainy photo didn't show his face clearly, thank goodness, but it captured something else. The way the twins clung to him, the protective curve of his body around theirs. It reminded him of another photo, worn and creased, that still lived in his wallet. "Some things are worth any price, Jake," Sarah's voice whispered in his memory. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. But something made him answer. "Mr. Miller?" The voice was professional, efficient. "This is James Carson, Ms. Chase's personal assistant. She would very much like to meet the man who saved her children." Jake looked at his bandaged hands, then at the newspaper. The twins. Aunt had probably identified him. It was inevitable, really, in a town this size. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. "With all due respect, sir, that's not what the structural engineers are saying. You shouldn't have been able to reach them. The void space you found, it was impossible. You did the impossible last night." Jake watched as a fleet of black SUVs left the airport, heading toward town, toward the hospital where the twins were being kept for observation. Toward him. "Mr. Miller, are you there?" "Yes," he said finally, "I'm here." And he was. For the first time in 5 years, Jake Miller was fully, completely present in his own life. Something had shifted during the night, something as profound as the earth movement that had started it all. He couldn't go back to being invisible now, even if he wanted to. The newspaper fluttered on his passenger seat as another aftershock trembled through the town. But this time, the ground wasn't the only thing changing. Victoria Chase's Louboutin heels were never meant for earthquake zones. The red soles, usually so pristine, collected dust as she navigated the hospital parking lot, their distinctive click-clack muffled by debris. She had come straight from a Geneva boardroom, her tailored Chanel suit incongruous among the emergency vehicles and exhausted rescue workers. 16 hours. It had been 16 hours since her assistant had interrupted a crucial merger negotiation with news that would stop her heart. "Miss Chase, there's been an earthquake in Millbrook. The community center, your children." She had left everything. The merger, the boardroom full of stunned executives, the carefully constructed facade of the untouchable CEO. Her perfectly maintained designer stilettos now bore the scars of her desperate rush home, scuffed and dusty like her composure. "The twins are fine, Ms. Chase," Dr. Reynolds assured her as she strode through the hospital corridors, her security detail struggling to keep pace. "Just some minor scrapes and dehydration. They're sleeping now." "Tell me everything," she commanded, her voice steady even as her hands shook. Every detail. The doctor described the rescue, while Victoria listened with the same intense focus she usually reserved for quarterly reports. But when he mentioned the mysterious handyman who had spent hours digging through rubble with his bare hands, her steel composure cracked. "He stayed with them the whole time," the doctor continued, "kept them calm by talking about stars and constellations. They wouldn't let go of him, even after—" Victoria stopped walking so abruptly that her security detail nearly collided with her. "They were afraid of the dark," she whispered. "Ever since Richard, I bought them that telescope, but I never had time to—" She caught herself, straightening her spine. Victoria Chase didn't do public vulnerability. But here, in this hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, the carefully maintained walls between CEO and mother were crumbling like the buildings in her hometown. The twins' room was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. Victoria's stilettos sank into the industrial carpet as she approached their beds. Sophia and Samuel lay curled toward each other, even in sleep, their faces peaceful, despite the small scrapes and bandages. Their dusty clothes had been replaced with hospital gowns, but someone had carefully placed their space-themed backpack, battered but intact, between their beds. Victoria sank into the chair between them, her usual grace deserting her. Her children, her babies. While she had been negotiating million-dollar deals in Switzerland, they had been trapped in the dark, crying for help. While she had been building an empire, someone else had moved heaven and earth to save them. "Mommy?" Sophia's voice, scratchy from dust and tears, broke through Victoria's thoughts. Both twins were awake now, their eyes wide and uncertain, as if they couldn't quite believe she was there. "I'm here, my stars," Victoria whispered, gathering them into her arms. Her suit would be ruined by their tears and hospital room wrinkles, but for once she didn't care. "I'm here now. He saved us, Mommy," Samuel said into her shoulder. "The fix-it man. He talked to us about Polaris and Cassiopeia," Sophia added. "He wasn't afraid of the dark at all." Victoria held them tighter, her own tears threatening to fall. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "Tell me everything." The twins spoke over each other in their excitement, their earlier exhaustion forgotten. They told her about Jake Miller's calm voice in the darkness, about his patience as they recited constellations, about his gentle hands guiding them to safety. Their words painted a picture of a man who had risked everything for 2 children he barely knew. A noise in the doorway made them all look up. Caroline stood there, holding a copy of the Millbrook Morning Herald, the headline about the mystery. Hero seemed to pulse with new significance. They found him, Caroline said quietly. He's been here all night, watching over the rescue efforts. Wouldn't leave until he knew everyone was safe. Victoria looked down at her dusty stilettos, thinking of the long hours this man had spent digging through rubble while she raced across continents. She had built her life on being in control, on never needing anyone's help. But last night, when her children needed her most, she had been powerless. A stranger, no, a hero, had stepped into that void. "Bring him to me," she said, her voice carrying the weight of both command and plea. "I need to," she trailed off, for once unsure of what she needed. To thank him, to understand him, to ask why a man who barely knew her children had shown more devotion to them in one night than she had in months of flying between business meetings. The twins snuggled closer, their small hands clutching her expensive suit. Outside the window, morning sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, making them look like tiny stars. Somewhere in this town, a handyman with torn hands and a quiet voice had given her a gift beyond price. Victoria Chase had built an empire on knowing the value of everything. But as she held her children and waited to meet their savior, she realized some things could never be measured in dollars and cents. Security camera footage would later show an unlikely scene in the hospital's third-floor corridor. A billionaire CEO in a dust-covered Chanel suit, and a handyman in worn work clothes standing at opposite ends of the hallway, each hesitating before taking the first step forward. The grainy video captured the moment perfectly, two worlds about to collide. Jake saw her first. Even disheveled from transcontinental travel, Victoria Chase commanded attention. But it wasn't her designer outfit or executive bearing that caught his eye. It was the way she carried herself, like someone used to holding the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. Victoria noticed his hands first, bandaged and raw. They hung at his sides like badges of honor. This was not the polished hero she'd half expected from the newspaper coverage. This was a man who looked like he'd been through war, his work clothes still bearing the dust of his battlefield. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast. "Miss Chase," he responded, his tone equally measured though far less practiced. They stood there, separated by 20 feet of hospital corridor and worlds of experience, neither quite sure how to bridge the gap. The security camera silently recorded their standoff, a moment that would later become part of the town's folklore. "I understand," Victoria finally began, then stopped. Understanding was her business. Markets, trends, technologies. But this? How could she understand someone who had spent hours in the dark, bleeding into his work gloves, to save children he'd never met? "They're good kids," Jake said simply, as if that explained everything. "Smart, too. Know more about stars than I ever will." Something in Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked. "They said you talked to them about constellations, kept them calm in the dark. They did all the hard work. I just listened." "Just listened?" Victoria took a step forward, her heel clicking sharply on the floor. "You dug through unstable rubble for hours. The structural engineers said that void space shouldn't have existed. That what you did was what anyone would have done," Jake cut in, uncomfortable with the direction of her words. "No." Victoria closed the distance between them, close enough now to see the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "Not anyone. You." Jake shifted, his bandaged hands flexing unconsciously. "Ms. Chase, Victoria," she corrected automatically, then surprised herself with the informality. "Victoria," he amended, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "Your children are safe. That's what matters. You don't owe me anything." She laughed then, a sound caught between gratitude and disbelief. "Don't owe you, Mr. Miller. I owe you everything." The security camera caught the moment his expression changed, softened by something that looked like recognition. Here was another. A parent who understood that some debts could never be repaid, some gifts never properly acknowledged. "Jake," he said quietly, "if I'm calling you Victoria." A noise from the twins' room interrupted them. Samuel's voice, raised in excitement. As he described some aspect of the rescue to his aunt, both adults turned toward the sound instinctively, their shared concern momentarily bridging the gulf between their worlds. "They've been asking for you," Victoria said, watching Jake's face carefully. "They want to show you something. If you're willing." Jake glanced down at his bandaged hands, then at his dust-covered clothes. "I'm not exactly. You're exactly what they need right now," Victoria finished for him. Then, more softly, "What we all need." The security camera recorded. Their walk to the twins' room, the billionaire and the handyman, moving in unconscious synchronization. It captured the way Victoria's hand moved, as if to steady Jake, when he swayed slightly from exhaustion, though she caught herself before making contact. It documented the precise moment Jake's tired posture straightened as they approached the room, gathering strength from some deep reserve. But what the camera couldn't capture was the electricity in the air between them, the unspoken recognition of two people who had built their lives around different kinds of strength, now finding unexpected common ground in their concern for two young stars who had survived the darkness. Just before they entered the room, Victoria paused. "Thank you," she said simply, all her corporate polish stripped away, leaving only raw gratitude. Jake nodded, understanding everything she couldn't say. After all, he was fluent in the language of things left unspoken. The security camera recorded them disappearing into the room together, its unblinking eye witnessing the moment when Millbrook's most unlikely story began its next chapter. Victoria's family ring caught the morning light as she twisted it nervously around her finger, a habit she'd thought she'd broken years ago. The antique diamond, passed down through 4 generations of Chase women, had always represented power and legacy. Now, watching her children's faces light up as Jake entered their hospital room, she wondered if perhaps it could mean something more. "Mr. Jake!" The twins called out in unison, their hospital beds forgotten as they rushed to him. They stopped, short of actually touching him, suddenly conscious of his bandaged hands. "Hey, stars," Jake said softly, carefully kneeling to their level despite his exhaustion. "Still shining bright, I see." Victoria watched the interaction with an economist's eye for detail. The way Sophia tucked herself slightly behind her brother, but kept one hand reached out toward Jake. The way Samuel stood protective, yet seeking protection. The way Jake naturally adjusted his position to accommodate both children's needs without seeming to think about it. "We were just telling Mommy about the constellations," Samuel announced proudly. "About how you knew Polaris would lead us home." "Actually," Sophia corrected, her voice carrying that familiar, precise tone that always reminded Victoria of herself. "Mr. Jake said we knew the constellations. He just listened." Jake caught Victoria's eye over the twins' heads, sharing a moment of quiet amusement at Sophia's accuracy. The ring turned another circle around Victoria's finger. "Are you hungry?" she found herself asking. "The children haven't eaten, and I'm sure you haven't either, and I thought perhaps—" She trailed off, realizing she was rambling, something Victoria Chase never did. "Pizza!" the twins exclaimed, again in that uncanny unison. "In the hospital." Victoria's corporate instinct surfaced automatically. "I'm not sure it's actually not a bad idea," Jake interjected gently. "After what they've been through, a little comfort food might help. There's a place downtown that delivers, even makes the crust in the shape of a star, if you ask." Victoria saw the hope bloom on her children's faces and felt something shift inside her. How many times had she denied such simple requests in favor of nutritionally optimized meals prepared by private chefs? How many moments of potential joy had she sacrificed on the altar of proper protocol? "Pizza it is," she declared, pulling out her phone, then surprising herself again, "but only if Mr. Jake stays to share it with us." The twins bounced with excitement, careful not to jostle their IV lines. Jake looked like he might protest, but one look at the children's faces crumbled his resistance. "I suppose my next job can wait," he said, settling into one of the room's chairs with careful movements that didn't quite hide his physical distress. Victoria made the call. ordering with the same efficiency she used in corporate acquisitions. But when the twins insisted she add extra cheese because Mr. Jake saved us, her voice softened noticeably. As they waited for the food, the twins took turns telling their mother about the rescue, each detail carefully preserved in their young minds. Victoria found herself drawn into their narrative, seeing the terrifying experience transformed through the lens of their resilience and Jake's quiet heroism. And then, Samuel was saying, when the flashlight died, we weren't even scared anymore. Because Mr. Jake said sometimes feeling is more important than seeing. Victoria's ring caught the light again as her hand froze mid-twist. How many times had she insisted on seeing everything, controlling everything, planning everything? When was the last time she had simply felt? The pizza arrived on a cart, pushed by a starstruck nurse who had clearly read the morning paper. Jake shrank slightly from her admiring gaze, but the twins proudly announced, "He's our hero," with such innocent certainty that even Victoria had to smile. They ate together, an impromptu family picnic in a hospital room. Victoria watched in amazement as her usually proper children giggled over stringy cheese and greasy fingers. Jake showed them how to fold their slices, New York style, a skill he'd learned during his brief construction work in the city years ago. "Daddy used to fold his pizza too," Sophia said suddenly, her voice small but clear. The room stilled. Victoria's ring spun faster on her finger, a nervous tell she couldn't control. They so rarely spoke of Richard anymore, but Jake didn't falter. "Your daddy sounds like a man who knew his pizza," he said gently. "Want to show me how he did it?" The twins launched into a detailed demonstration. Their grief momentarily transformed into a cherished memory shared with a new friend. Victoria watched, her corporate mask slipping further as she witnessed this man she barely knew handle her children's delicate emotions with instinctive grace. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the hospital window. In its light, Victoria's family ring sparkled with possibilities she had never considered, not of power or legacy, but of healing, of connection, of family redefined. She looked at her children, laughing as Jake told them about the constellations, visible from New York's crowded streets, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The stack of medical bills lay forgotten in Jake's truck glove compartment, their edges worn from years of being handled, folded, and put away again. He hadn't looked at them since Sarah's passing, but he knew exactly what they said. Each page told the story of their last year together: chemotherapy sessions, experimental treatments, desperate attempts to buy more time. A week had passed since the earthquake. Jake sat in his truck outside the Chase estate, where he'd been called to assess earthquake damage to the property. The bills seemed to whisper to him through the closed compartment, a reminder of why he kept people at arm's length. Loss had a way of teaching hard lessons. The mansion loomed before him, its pristine facade bearing only minimal evidence of the quake. Unlike the rest of Millbrook, the Chase estate had been built to withstand natural disasters. If only, Jake thought, they could build hearts the same way. "Mr. Jake!" Twin voices broke through his reverie. Sophia and Samuel bounded down the front steps, already recovered from their ordeal with the resilience only children possess. Their mother followed at a more measured pace, her heels clicking on the marble steps. "Stars," he greeted them warmly, pushing thoughts of medical bills aside. "How are my favorite astronomers today?" "We're going back to school tomorrow," Samuel announced. "But we wanted to show you something first," Sophia added, tugging gently at his newly healed hands. Victoria reached them just as Jake was being led toward the house. "I told them to wait," she said, apologetic. "The contractor can—" "It's fine," Jake assured her. He'd learned over the past week that resistance was futile when the twins had their minds set on something. They led him through the mansion's east wing to a room he'd never seen before. Large windows offered a view of the grounds, but it was the far wall that caught his attention. A massive photograph showed a younger Victoria with a handsome man, both of them cradling infant twins. "That's Daddy," Samuel said softly. It was his study. The room bore evidence of recent use. Children's astronomy books scattered on expensive leather chairs, star charts taped carefully to antique wallpaper. Victoria moved to straighten some papers, her fingers lingering on the desk's polished surface. Richard loved this room, she said quietly. After the accident, I kept it locked for years. But the twins found their way in somehow, like they knew they needed this connection to him. Jake understood. He thought of Sarah's garden, still wild and overgrown because he couldn't bear to change what she'd last tended. Sometimes, he said, the places they loved keep them closest to us. Victoria's eyes met his, recognition flickering. Your wife, cancer, he said simply, 5 years ago. Richard's accident was 5 years ago too. Victoria sank into a leather chair, her professional poise slipping. Sometimes I think I've handled it all wrong. The company took over everything, board meetings, overseas trips, endless negotiations. I thought if I kept moving fast enough, the pain couldn't catch up. The twins had drifted to the window, pointing out constellations they could identify even in daylight. Jake watched them, thinking of the medical bills in his truck. I did the opposite, he admitted. Took only local jobs. Kept my world small, manageable. And now here we are, Victoria said softly. Our carefully constructed world shaken up by an earthquake and 2 amateur astronomers. Jake smiled despite himself. The universe has a strange sense of humor. Look, Sophia called from the window. You can see where the community center used to be. The adults joined them at the window. The damaged building was visible in the distance, construction crews already at work on its reconstruction. Victoria had insisted on funding it personally, along with repairs to other damaged structures in town. It's going to be better than before, Victoria told the twins, with a proper observatory on the roof. She glanced at Jake. We'll need someone to oversee the safety features, of course. Someone who understands both construction and stars. Jake felt the weight of the offer in her words. The medical bills in his truck seemed to fade in importance, replaced by the warmth of small hands slipping into his. Can you do it, Mr. Jake? Samuel asked. Please? We could help, Sophia added quickly. We know all about stars. Jake looked at these 2 children who had survived the darkness, at their mother who was trying to rebuild more than just buildings, and thought about Sarah. She'd always said healing came in unexpected ways. Well, he said finally, I suppose every construction project needs good astronomers. The twins beamed, and for a moment the study felt less like a shrine to loss and more like a promise of something new. Outside, clouds parted, letting in a shaft of sunlight that made the old photograph glow. 2 sets of parents, separated by time but united by love, watching over a future none of them could have predicted. The architectural plans for the new community centre lay spread across Victoria's antique mahogany desk, their crisp blue lines promising rebirth from rubble. But it was the childish drawings taped around the edges that kept drawing her eye. The twins' enthusiastic additions to the official designs. They'd sketched stars and telescopes in the margins, their visions of the future observatory bringing warmth to the technical precision of the blueprints. The support structure for the dome needs reinforcement here, Jake said, pointing to a section with his now healed hands. He'd been coming to the estate regularly for the past 3 weeks, reviewing plans and coordinating with contractors. If he noticed how these meetings always seemed to coincide with the twins' free time, he didn't mention it. What about the viewing platform? Victoria asked, leaning closer to study the section he indicated. She caught a faint scent of sawdust and coffee, an oddly comforting combination that she'd come to associate with these planning sessions. Mommy, can we show Mr. Jake the surprise now? Samuel's voice carried from the doorway, where he and Sophia had been none too quietly waiting for a break in the adults' discussion. Victoria checked her watch, a habit even her children recognized, but before she could respond, Jake turned to the twins with a conspiratorial smile. A surprise, stars, for me. It's in the garden, Sophia announced, practically bouncing with excitement. We've been working on it all week. Victoria found herself swept along as the twins led Jake through the house and out to what had once been her husband's rose garden. Richard had loved his roses, meticulously tending them himself despite having a full staff of gardeners. After his death, she'd let the garden go wild, unable to bear seeing anyone else caring for his beloved flowers. But now, as they rounded the corner, she stopped short. The overgrown tangle had been transformed. Neat paths wound between carefully tended beds where Richard's roses once again stood proud and healthy. Small solar-powered lights lined the walkways, arranged in familiar patterns. "Look," Samuel pointed upward. "We mapped the constellations." Sure enough, the lights had been positioned to mirror the night sky. Polaris anchored the north, with Cassiopeia, Ursa Major, and other familiar patterns spreading out across the garden paths. "The gardeners helped us save the roses," Sophia explained earnestly to Jake. "And then we made it into a star map, so you can practice astronomy even in daytime." Victoria watched Jake's face as he took in the children's creation. She saw the moment he recognized it for what it was. Not just a garden renovation, but an offering. A bridge between what was lost and what might be. "This is," Jake's voice caught slightly, "this is amazing, Stars. But how did you know about mapping constellations on the ground?" "From Daddy's books," Samuel said. "In his study, he used to map stars too. And Mommy helped with the roses," Sophia added. She remembered all their names, even though she said she never paid attention when Daddy talked about them. Victoria felt warmth flood her cheeks. She had surprised herself with that knowledge, the names of Richard's beloved varieties surfacing from some deep place in her memory. Peace, Double Delight, Mr. Lincoln. "We thought," Samuel continued, suddenly shy, "maybe you could teach us about building things, and we could teach you about stars, and Mommy could teach us about the roses. And then nobody has to remember alone," Sophia finished. Jake turned to Victoria, his eyes bright with understanding. She saw her own emotions reflected there, the bittersweet ache of past love, the tentative hope of new connections, the healing and power of shared memory. "The roses need regular care," she found herself saying, "if you'd be willing to help the twins learn. That is, if you have time between overseeing the construction." "I think," Jake said softly, watching the twins arrange. Small stones around a solar light to better mark Orion's belt. Some things are worth making time for. They stood together in the renewed garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and the geometry of earthbound stars. Victoria thought about the blueprints on her desk, with their precise measurements and calculated loads. But here was a different kind of architecture, the careful construction of something far more delicate and precious than any building. "Mr. Jake," Sophia tugged at his hand, "can we show you how to deadhead the roses? Mommy showed us yesterday." "Deadheading?" Jake raised an eyebrow at Victoria. "Removing spent blooms to encourage new growth," she explained, then added softly, "Sometimes letting go of what's finished is the only way to make room for what's next." The evening sun slanted through the garden, catching the solar lights just as they began to twinkle on. In their gentle glow, Victoria watched Jake kneel beside her children, his strong hands learning the delicate art of tending roses. The architectural plans for the community center could wait. This blueprint, this tender mapping of hearts and healing, demanded its own kind of attention. Above them, the real stars waited to emerge, eternal witnesses to the careful reconstruction taking place below. Not just of buildings, but of lives. Not just of gardens, but of hearts. The latest issue of Business Week lay unopened on Victoria's desk, her own image staring back at her from the cover. "Chase Industries in Crisis. Can the Ice Queen maintain her grip?" The headline felt like an accusation, the magazine's presence, a reminder of the world she'd been trying to hold at bay. "The board is concerned," James, her PA, said quietly. He'd flown in from New York that morning, bearing more than just the magazine. "They're questioning your extended stay in Millbrook. The Singapore merger is stalling, and the Tokyo office is demanding immediate decisions on the restructuring. Victoria stared out her study window, where she could see Jake and the twins in the rose garden. They were installing a small fountain, the children handing him tools while he explained the basics of water pressure. Their laughter drifted up, a counterpoint to the corporate tension filling her study. "I can't leave them again," she said, more to herself than James. "Not now." "With all due respect, Miss Chase," James pressed, "you've been here for 6 weeks. The shareholders are nervous. There's talk of an emergency board meeting to discuss temporary leadership alternatives." The implied threat was clear. She'd spent 15 years building Chase Industries into a global powerhouse, sacrificing countless bedtime stories and school plays for the sake of the company. Now, just as she'd finally found a balance that felt right, it was all threatening to unravel. "The community center project can be managed remotely," James finished. "The local contractors are more than capable, and Mr. Miller has proven himself extremely competent in overseeing the reconstruction." At the mention of Jake's name, Victoria's fingers traced the magazine's glossy cover. The photographer had captured her signature boardroom look, elegant, untouchable, powerful. The Ice Queen, they called her, the woman who could freeze out any opposition with a single glance. But that woman felt like a stranger now, as foreign as the idea of leaving her children just when they'd started to feel like a real family. A knock at the study door interrupted her thoughts. Sophia stood there, her small face serious. "Mommy?" "Mr. Jake showed us how the fountain works with gravity, and he said it's like how stars are born from dust falling together, and we thought maybe you'd want to see." Victoria felt the weight of James's presence behind her, the pressure of responsibilities, accumulated over years of putting business first. The magazine seemed to mock her from the desk, its headline a reminder of everything she stood to lose. "I have some calls to make, sweetheart," she began, falling back on familiar excuses. But the words felt ashen in her mouth. Sophia's face fell. Slightly, but she nodded with practiced understanding. "That's okay. We know you're busy. Like before. Like before." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Before the earthquake. Before Jake. Before she'd remembered what it felt like to be more than just CEO of Chase Industries. Through the window, she could see Samuel showing Jake his latest star chart, the boy's face animated as he explained something about celestial navigation. Jake listened with the same careful attention he gave to structural engineering problems, his respect for the child's knowledge evident in every nod. "The Berlin office called twice this morning," James added quietly. "They need answers." "About the tech acquisition." Victoria picked up the magazine, studying her cover photo. The Ice Queen stared back, perfectly coiffed, perfectly controlled, perfectly alone. Is this what she wanted the twins to remember? Another version of the absent parent, choosing empire over family? "Mommy?" Sophia lingered in the doorway. "Mr. Jake says understanding pressure is important in both fountains and business. He said sometimes you have to know when to let it flow and when to contain it." Victoria's head snapped up. Out in the garden, Jake was now explaining to Samuel how the fountain's basin contained and redirected the water's force. His words drifted up. "Sometimes the strongest structures are the ones that know how to channel pressure instead of just resisting it." She looked at the magazine again, but this time she saw beyond the Ice Queen facade. She saw a woman who had built an empire strong enough to survive change. A woman who had constructed something that could stand on its own, even if its architect stepped away for a while. "James," she said, her voice carrying the same authority that had built Chase Industries, but tempered now with something new. "Call the board. I'm not leaving Millbrook, but I have a proposal for them. It's time we discussed restructuring, not just the Tokyo office, but my role as well." She stood, straightening her suit jacket out of habit. "And cancel my calls for the afternoon. I need to learn about fountains and gravity." The magazine lay forgotten on her desk as she followed Sophia into the garden, leaving behind the Ice Queen and her lonely empire. Sometimes She was learning. The most important business decisions had nothing to do with business at all. The hand-drawn card lay on Victoria's desk, its construction paper surface covered with the twins' careful artwork. They'd drawn 4 figures standing beneath a star-filled sky, 2 small shapes flanked by 2 larger ones, all holding hands. Above the figures, written in Sophia's precise lettering, "Our new constellation." Victoria traced the drawing with her fingertip, noting how Samuel had added detailed stars in scientifically accurate patterns, while Sophia had labeled each figure with their names. Her throat tightened at the sight of Mommy and Mr. Jake. Written side by side, connected by a line of silver glitter. They spent all morning on it, Jake said from the doorway, his voice carrying a mix of emotion she'd grown skilled at reading over the past weeks. "I found them raiding the craft supplies before breakfast." "Come in," she said softly, still studying the drawing. "They've added Orion's belt above your head." Jake crossed to the desk, his work boots quiet on the expensive carpet. He'd stopped, apologizing for tracking dust into the mansion weeks ago, just as she'd stopped wearing her designer suits for their daily planning sessions. "They're mapping us," he said, looking at the card. "Like their own private sky. Are we that transparent?" Victoria asked, trying to make light of it, but her voice wavered slightly. "To them, completely." Jake smiled, but she caught the edge of uncertainty in his expression. Kids have a way of seeing right through adult complications. As if summoned by their discussion, the twins appeared in the doorway. Still in their pajamas, despite the late morning hour, they carried their astronomy textbook, the one that had survived the earthquake, in their backpack. "We have a hypothesis," Sophia announced, using one of her new favorite words. "A scientific one," Samuel added quickly. Victoria and Jake exchanged glances, familiar now with the twins' scientific proclamations. "All right, stars," Jake said. "Let's hear it." The children approached the desk with the serious determination of young researchers about to present important findings. Sophia opened the textbook to a carefully marked page about binary star systems. "See," she pointed to the diagram. "Some stars orbit each other. They look like one star from far away, but they're actually 2 dancing together. And they're stronger together," Samuel continued eagerly. "They share gravity and light and everything." Victoria felt her chest tighten as she realized where this was heading. Jake's hand, resting on the desk near hers, twitched slightly. "We think," Sophia said, her voice taking on that tone that reminded everyone so much of her mother, "that maybe grown-ups can be like binary stars too. But," Samuel added, his face scrunching with concern, "you both keep acting like separate stars, staying in your own orbits, even though we can all see your gravity pulling at each other," Sophia finished. Victoria's hand moved unconsciously toward Jake's, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. She thought of the board meeting scheduled for next week, where she would present her plan for restructuring her role. Thought of Jake's careful distance lately, his growing awareness of the gossip spreading through town. "Stars," Jake began gently. "Adult relationships are complicated, only because you make them that way," Samuel interrupted with the devastating directness of childhood. "You're afraid." "Like we were in the dark," Sophia added quietly. "But you taught us that being afraid doesn't mean you have to stay stuck." Victoria looked at the card again, at those 4 figures holding hands beneath a glitter-strewn sky. She thought of all the times she'd held back out of fear of losing control, fear of being vulnerable, fear of loving too much only to lose again. "When did you 2 become so wise?" she asked, her voice rough with emotion. "We learned from you." "Both," Sophia said simply. "Mommy, you taught us that building things takes courage. And Mr. Jake showed us that fixing broken things makes them stronger," Samuel added. Jake's hand finally moved, crossing the small space to cover Victoria's. The contact sent warmth spreading up her arm, as if completing some long interrupted "A circuit! Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. "They get their scientific method from you," Victoria replied softly. "And their strategic thinking from you," he countered, a smile tugging at his lips. The twins beamed at this exchange, clearly pleased with the success of their hypothesis. Sophia pulled another piece of paper from the textbook, a chart with careful columns and check marks. "We've been collecting data," she announced proudly, "about how you both smile more when you're together, and how the air feels warmer, and how the stars seem brighter." "Very scientific observations," Jake said, his thumb now tracing small circles on Victoria's hand. "With reproducible results," Victoria added. Her CEO's precision softened by the laughter in her voice. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, catching the glitter on the twins' card and sending sparks of light dancing across the ceiling like tiny stars. 4 figures, drawn in crayon but connected by something stronger than art supplies, stood together beneath a sky full of possibilities. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, "in binary star systems, the stars don't just orbit each other, they help each other shine brighter." Victoria turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining like constellations finding their pattern. "I suppose," she said, looking at their children's hopeful faces, "sometimes the wisest astronomers are the ones who see what's right in front of us." The card sparkled on her desk, a hypothesis proven by the hearts that had drawn it. A map of love, sketched in crayon and glitter and truth. The hand-drawn card lay on Victoria's desk, its construction paper surface covered with the twins' careful artwork. They'd drawn 4 figures standing beneath a star-filled sky, 2 small shapes flanked by 2 larger ones, all holding hands. Above the figures, written in Sophia's precise lettering, "Our new constellation." Victoria traced the drawing with her fingertip, noting how Samuel had added detailed stars in scientifically accurate patterns, while Sophia had labeled each figure with their names. Her throat tightened at the sight of Mommy and Mr. Jake. Written side by side, connected by a line of silver glitter. "They spent all morning on it," Jake said from the doorway, his voice carrying a mix of emotion she'd grown skilled at reading over the past weeks. "I found them raiding the craft supplies before breakfast." "Come in," she said softly, still studying the drawing. "They've added Orion's belt above your head." Jake crossed to the desk, his work boots quiet on the expensive carpet. He'd stopped, apologizing for tracking dust into the mansion weeks ago, just as she'd stopped wearing her designer suits for their daily planning sessions. "They're mapping us," he said, looking at the card, "like their own private sky." "Are we that transparent?" Victoria asked, trying to make light of it, but her voice wavered slightly. "To them, completely." Jake smiled, but she caught the edge of uncertainty in his expression. "Kids have a way of seeing right through adult complications." As if summoned by their discussion, the twins appeared in the doorway, still in their pajamas, despite the late morning hour. They carried their astronomy textbook, the one that had survived the earthquake, in their backpack. "We have a hypothesis," Sophia announced, using one of her new favorite words. "A scientific one," Samuel added quickly. Victoria and Jake exchanged glances, familiar now with the twins' scientific proclamations. "All right, stars," Jake said. "Let's hear it." The children approached the desk with the serious determination of young researchers about to present important findings. Sophia opened the textbook to a carefully marked page about binary star systems. "See?" She pointed to the diagram. "Some stars orbit each other. They look like one star from far away, but they're actually 2 dancing together. And they're stronger together," Samuel continued eagerly. "They share gravity and light and everything." Victoria felt her chest tighten as she realized where this was heading. Jake's hand, resting on the desk near hers, twitched slightly. "We think," Sophia said, her voice taking on that tone that reminded everyone so much of her mother, "that maybe grown-ups can be like binary stars too. But," Samuel added, his face scrunching with concern, "you both keep acting like separate stars, staying in your own orbits. Even though we can all see your gravity pulling at each other," Sophia finished. Victoria's hand moved unconsciously toward Jake's, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. She thought of the board meeting scheduled for next week, where she would present her plan for restructuring her role. Thought of Jake's careful distance lately, his growing awareness of the gossip spreading through town. "Stars," Jake began gently. "Adult relationships are complicated, only because you make them that way," Samuel interrupted with the devastating directness of childhood. "You're afraid, like we were in the dark," Sophia added quietly. "But you taught us that being afraid doesn't mean you have to stay stuck." Victoria looked at the card again, at those 4 figures holding hands beneath a glitter-strewn sky. She thought of all the times she'd held back out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being vulnerable, fear of loving too much only to lose again. "When did you two become so wise?" she asked, her voice rough with emotion. "We learned from you." "Both," Sophia said simply. "Mommy, you taught us that building things takes courage. And Mr. Jake showed us that fixing broken things makes them stronger," Samuel added. Jake's hand finally moved, crossing the small space to cover Victoria's. The contact sent warmth spreading up her arm, as if completing some long-interrupted circuit. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. "They get their scientific method from you," Victoria replied softly. "And their strategic thinking from you," he countered, a smile tugging at his lips. The twins beamed at this exchange, clearly pleased with the success of their hypothesis. Sophia pulled another piece of paper from the textbook, a chart with careful columns and check marks. "We've been collecting data," she announced proudly, "about how you both smile more when you're together, and how the air feels warmer, and how the stars seem brighter." "Very scientific observations," Jake said, his thumb now tracing small circles on Victoria's hand. "With reproducible results," Victoria added, her CEO's precision softened by the laughter in her voice. The morning sun streamed through the study windows, catching the glitter on the twins' card and sending sparks of light dancing across the ceiling like tiny stars. 4 figures, drawn in crayon but connected by something stronger than art supplies, stood together beneath a sky full of possibilities. "You know," Jake said thoughtfully, "in binary star systems, the stars don't just orbit each other. They help each other shine brighter." Victoria turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining like constellations finding their pattern. "I suppose," she said, looking at their children's hopeful faces, "sometimes the wisest astronomers are the ones who see what's right in front of us." The card sparkled on her desk, a hypothesis proven by the hearts that had drawn it, a map of love sketched in crayon and glitter and truth. The star map lay spread across the boardroom table, incongruous among the quarterly reports and market projections. Sophia and Samuel had created it as a gift for Victoria's presentation to the board, marking important dates in their family's journey with constellations. Orion for the night of the earthquake, Polaris for their rescue, Cassiopeia for the first time they'd all had pizza in the hospital. "As you can see," Victoria addressed the board members, some present in person, others watching via video conference. "My proposal isn't about stepping back from Chase Industries. It's about stepping forward into a new way of leading." She stood at the head of the table in her signature power suit. But something had changed. The Ice Queen was gone, replaced by something far more powerful, a woman who had found her true north. "Our company has always been about innovation," she continued, her hand resting on the star map, "about finding new ways to solve old problems. Well, I'm introducing a new model of corporate leadership, one that proves we don't have to choose between family and success. We can redefine both." The twins sat quietly in the corner of the boardroom, dressed in their best clothes, their presence both a statement and a reminder of what was at stake. Jake stood behind them, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the suit Victoria had insisted on, but his steady presence gave her strength. "The Singapore merger can proceed with me based in our Millbrook office. Modern technology makes location irrelevant. And let's be honest," she smiled, warming the room like sunrise, "some of our best innovations have come from thinking outside traditional corporate structures." She clicked to the next slide, revealing plans for the newly rebuilt community. Center. Take this project, a small-town reconstruction that's become a model for disaster resilience and community engagement. We've already received inquiries from 3 major cities about implementing similar designs. The board members stirred, interest piqued by the prospect of new revenue streams. Victoria pressed her advantage, but more importantly, this project taught me something crucial about leadership. Sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built in boardrooms, they're built in the spaces where life actually happens. She glanced at Jake, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. The twins beamed, recognizing the reference to his construction wisdom. I'm not asking permission. Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone who had found her true power. I'm presenting a new vision for corporate leadership, one that proves we can be stronger by being more human, not less. Chase Industries didn't become a global leader by following old models. We did it by daring to imagine new ones. The star. Maps sparkled with the twins' carefully applied glitter, catching the boardroom's sterile light and transforming it into something magical. Samuel had insisted on adding a new constellation, one he'd created himself, shaped like a house with a heart at its center. My children, Victoria gestured to the twins, her voice softening, recently taught me about binary star systems, stars that appear single from a distance but are actually 2 stars orbiting each other, making each other stronger. That's what I'm proposing here, a way to orbit both family and business, letting each make the other stronger. She clicked to her final slide, displaying growth projections that showed how her restructured role could actually benefit the company. The numbers support this change, but more importantly, the future demands it. We have an opportunity to show that true leadership isn't about sacrifice, it's about integration. The boardroom fell silent. Victoria stood tall, her hands still resting on her children's star map. Behind her, Jake and the twins waited, a constellation of support. Finally, the board chairman spoke. This is unprecedented. So was a woman. CEO 20 years ago, Victoria countered smoothly. So was a tech company based in a small town. Chase Industries has always defined its own path. Another board member leaned forward. And the community center project, you'll continue to oversee it? Along with our new head of special projects, Victoria smiled, gesturing to Jake, who, as it happens, has shown us how practical experience and innovation can create something stronger than either could achieve alone. The twins squeezed Jake's hands as whispered discussions broke out among the board members. Victoria watched them with the patience of someone who knew she'd already won, not through corporate maneuvering, but through the simple truth of her conviction. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Later, as they walked out of the corporate office into the warm afternoon, Samuel tugged at Victoria's sleeve. "Mommy, did our star map help?" Victoria knelt down, heedless of her designer suit against the parking lot asphalt. "More than you know, my love. It reminded everyone that the best navigation systems aren't always the traditional ones. And sometimes," Jake added, helping her up, "the sweetest victories come from daring to chart a new course." Sophia pulled out her ever-present astronomy notebook. "We should mark this day on our family star chart. What constellation should it be?" Victoria looked at Jake, at their children, at the future they were building together. "How about we create our own, something that shows 4 stars spinning together, making their own kind of light? Above them, though hidden by daylight, the real stars wheeled in their ancient paths, witness to this new constellation taking shape below. One built, not of cosmic dust and gravity, but of love, courage, and the wisdom to let both worlds shine." The house keys jingled in Jake's hand as he stood before the renovated Victorian on Maple Street. Not Mrs. Henderson's house this time, his own, or rather theirs. The brass keys caught the late afternoon sun, one old and worn, one newly cut, joined by a small keychain adorned with hand-painted stars. "Ready?" Victoria asked softly, standing beside him. The twins bounced excitedly on the porch steps, already clutching their own sets of keys. their first real ones, marking this moment as much as the moving boxes stacked in the driveway. Almost, Jake smiled, running his hand along the porch. Railing he'd repaired himself. Just remembering something. The house had been his and Sarah's once, its rooms filled with dreams cut too short. For years after her death, he'd let it slowly fade, like a star losing its light. But now, looking at the freshly painted trim and carefully tended garden, he saw something different, not a memorial to loss, but a testament to renewal. "Mr. Jake," Samuel called out, "can we show Mommy the observatory first?" The observatory, Jake's wedding gift to Victoria, built into what had once been Sarah's art studio. He'd worked on it secretly for months, the twins, his eager conspirators, transforming the space into a perfect blend of their old and new lives. "Your mother hasn't even seen the living room yet," he chuckled, but Victoria was already being pulled toward the stairs by their excited children. "The living room can wait," she said, squeezing his hand. "Some stars can't." They followed the twins up to the third floor, where the observatory dome rose like a crown above the Victorians' traditional architecture. Jake had designed it himself, incorporating both modern technology and historic charm. The automated dome looked as if it had always been there, its copper surface weathered to match the old house's patina. "Now close your eyes, Mummy," Sophia instructed, her voice trembling with excitement. Victoria complied, allowing herself to be guided into the room. Jake moved to the control panel, and with a soft whir, the dome began to open to the late afternoon. "Sky, okay. Look!" Victoria opened her eyes to find herself in a space that bridged all their worlds. The observatory's professional-grade telescope stood in the center, but around it, the room told their family's story. Sarah's old easel remained in one corner, now holding star charts instead of paintings. Richard's astronomy books lined custom shelves Jake had built. The twins' drawings and calculations covered a dedicated wall space, but it was the ceiling that caught Victoria's breath. In the dome's inner surface, Jake had painted constellations that glowed with specialized paint, not just classical patterns, but their own family's stars. There was the rescue constellation the twins had invented, the binary star system that had helped them understand love, and a new pattern Jake had added in secret, 4 stars in the shape of infinity. "It's more than just an observatory," Jake said quietly. "It's every sky we've shared." Victoria turned to him, her corporate composure softening into wonder. "You built this for us?" "We helped," the twins chorused proudly. "They did," Jake confirmed. "Samuel calculated the exact angle for optimal viewing from our latitude. Sophia designed the storage systems for the equipment. They're getting pretty good at combining astronomy with practical engineering." Victoria walked slowly around the room, touching each element with reverence. Her fingers traced the spine of one of Richard's books, then brushed against Sarah's easel. "You kept them," she whispered. "Some things deserve to be part of the story," Jake said. "All of them. That's what makes a home, not forgetting the past, but building something new that honors it." The twins had already moved to the telescope, making small adjustments with the confidence of practiced astronomers. Through the open dome, the first evening star was becoming visible. "Venus," Samuel announced. "The evening star," Sophia added. "But it's actually a planet. And technically," Victoria smiled, falling into their familiar pattern of shared knowledge, "it's not even evening yet. We're just seeing it early because sometimes love shows up ahead of schedule," Jake finished, wrapping an arm around her waist. Victoria leaned into him, watching their children prepare for their nightly stargazing ritual. The house keys in Jake's hand caught the last sunlight, throwing tiny rainbows across the observatory floor. "You know," she said softly, "when I was the Ice Queen, I thought strength meant standing alone. Now I understand it means knowing what to hold on to." Jake opened his palm, looking at their keys nested together. "And what to let go of," he added. "Sarah would have loved this room. Richard too, I think. They're part of our constellation now, Victoria said. All of us, past and present, making something new together. The twins called them over excitedly. Venus was fully visible now, a bright point of hope in the darkening sky. As Jake and Victoria joined their children at the telescope, the house below them settled into its new identity. No longer just Jake's memorial or Victoria's escape, but a true home, where two broken families had found the courage to build something stronger together. The keys would soon hang by the front door, a daily reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures don't require traveling to distant stars. Sometimes they just need the courage to open a new door, step through, and let love rewrite the constellations of our hearts.